I want to tell you about the day I watched my own stepson get married from the wrong side of the room and understood, finally, clearly, the way you understand something you've been refusing to read, exactly what I had been to that family for 14 years. It started with a text message I wasn't supposed to feel anything about. It ended with a silence that said everything anyone needed to hear. But before we get there, tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. I read every single one. It was a Saturday in October, one of those Carolina mornings where the sky goes that deep, clean blue that makes you think the world is new again. I was standing in the bathroom of the house I'd owned for 31 years, knotting a burgundy tie my sister gave me last Christmas. I'd pressed my suit the night before. I had my shoes shined. I was ready. My stepson Kendrick was getting married that afternoon. The ceremony was at a vineyard out past Concord, about 40 minutes northeast of Charlotte, depending on traffic. He was 23 years old, marrying a woman named Elaine, a nursing student he'd met at a church event 2 years back. He was nervous and happy, and had been calling me in the weeks leading up to it, asking whether the wedding gift registry was too long and whether it was okay to cry during the vows. I told him it was fine to cry, that good men cry at things that matter. I had known Kendrick since he was 9 years old. He was a skinny kid with big ears and a habit of talking too fast when he was excited, which was most of the time. He used to bring me his math homework because his mother had no patience for long division. He was afraid of dogs until I took him to a shelter in Gastonia when he was 12 and let him walk a retriever named Biscuit for an hour and a half until he stopped flinching every time the dog got close. He never flinched around dogs again after that. His biological father, a man named Victor, had been out of the picture since Kendrick was 4. Not entirely, but mostly. He appeared now and then. Birthdays when he remembered. A random Tuesday when he was passing through town. He was the kind of man who showed up with good stories about how busy he'd been and walked out with your forgiveness before you'd finished your sentence. I'd met him twice over 14 years. Both times he shook my hand and called me man instead of my name, which told me everything I needed to know. Francine and I married when Kendrick was 11. She was 42 then, a bookkeeper at a dental practice on South Boulevard in Charlotte. I was 48, running a small mechanical contracting crew out of a shop off Billy Graham Parkway. We weren't young people making young people mistakes. We went in with our eyes open, or so I believed. I paid Kendrick's first semester at UNC Charlotte out of pocket when his financial aid didn't come through in time and Francine didn't have the reserves. I bought his first car, a 2011 Civic, with 74,000 miles on it, from a dealership down in Pineville, $8,000 cash. I co-signed his apartment lease in Atlanta when he moved down at 21 to try his hand at a landscaping business. When that didn't work out, I didn't say a word. I helped him pack and move back. When the online reselling venture went sideways for 8 months straight and burned through most of his savings, I didn't say anything about that either. I just made sure the phone plan was paid so he could keep making calls and keep trying. He found his footing, got certified as an HVAC technician, started working for a company in the Ballantine area, made enough to rent his own place and save a little, and buy Elaine a ring he'd picked out himself without asking anyone for money. I was proud of him the way I would have been proud of my own son if I'd had one. I thought he knew that. I was wrong about a few things. The morning of the wedding, I got a text from Francine at 10:47. I was already in the car, engine running. I read it. Stopped at a red light on Brookshire Freeway. It said, "Baby, Victor's here and he's a little emotional about the day. Kendrick asked if you could sit with the other guests for the ceremony. Just so it's not awkward up front. You're still family, it's not a big thing. I'll make it up to you. Love." I sat through a full light cycle. Someone behind me honked. I drove the rest of the way in silence. There is a certain kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It's the kind that settles in when your mind has received information it doesn't know how to file yet, like the moment after a near miss on the highway when everything is still and you're checking your hands to see if they're shaking. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I was just very, very still inside. The vineyard was beautiful. Rolling grass, white tents, string lights waiting on the evening. I gave my name to the woman with the clipboard, and she smiled and walked me to row 8. "Hazel seat," she said. "Good sight lines." I thanked her. The chairs in the front rows were marked with white ribbon, immediate family. I learned later that immediate family included Francine, Elaine's parents, Elaine's grandmother who had flown in from Shreveport, and Victor who had driven up that morning from Columbia, South Carolina. Victor was wearing a light gray suit. He sat in the front row next to Francine. He had his arm across the back of her chair for most of the ceremony. He wept when Kendrick and Elaine said their vows. Visible, open tears he dabbed with a folded handkerchief. People murmured. Someone leaned over and touched his shoulder. I sat in row 8 and watched. Kendrick looked good up there. He'd put on some real weight since he started working with his hands. Solid weight, the kind that comes from hauling equipment upstairs and spending days in crawl spaces. He stood straight-backed at the altar. When Elaine came down the aisle toward him, his face did exactly what I'd told him it was okay for it to do. He cried. I stayed dry-eyed, not because I wasn't moved, but because something had shifted in me around the second song, and I was concentrating hard on keeping the rest of myself contained. At the cocktail hour, I spoke to a few people from Francine's church. I drank club soda. I found my table assignment on a placard near the entrance. Table 7. I carried my jacket over and hung it on the back of the chair and sat down. Table 7 was a round of 8, some of Elaine's college friends, and a couple who had been Francine's neighbors from her old apartment building before we married. Nice people. No one I knew well. The family table was table 1, near the center of the tent, closest to where they'd set up the dance floor. Francine was there. Victor was there. Elaine's parents were there. I was at table 7. I ate the salmon. It was very good. I told the woman across from me I liked her earrings. I listened to the speeches. Victor's toast was the third one. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and spoke without notes. He said he remembered the day Kendrick was born, and knowing right then that God had handed him something he hadn't earned. He said he hadn't always been there the way a father should be, but that he was proud, so proud, and that Kendrick was the best of him. He said, "My son, today I see the man I always prayed you would become." People stood. They raised their glasses. They clapped. I picked up my fork. The drive home took 44 minutes. I took the long way on I-85 because I didn't want to sit through light cycles thinking. I passed the shop on Billy Graham Parkway and slowed without meaning to, then kept going. I pulled into my driveway at 10 past 11. Francine was staying the night with her sister and coming back in the morning. She was helping with the send-off, being useful the way she always liked to be. That had been the plan all along. I sat in the car with the engine off for a while. Not because I didn't know what I was going to do, because I did know, and I wanted to be certain. It wasn't the kind of decision that would look different by morning. It didn't look different by morning. I made coffee at 6:15 and drank it standing at the counter. I didn't sit at the kitchen table. I'm not entirely sure why, except that sitting there felt like settling into a story I had already finished reading. By 7:30, I had made 3 phone calls. The first was to First Heritage Credit Union on Carmel Road, where I'd held accounts for 22 years. I asked to remove Francine as joint holder on the savings account. It had been mine alone before the marriage. I'd added her 6 years in when she took a pay reduction, and we consolidated the household finances. The woman at the bank was professional and asked no unnecessary questions. I appreciated that. The second call was to my attorney, a man I'd used for the contracting business going on 13 years, sharp and plain-spoken. I told him I was considering the property situation and wanted to know where I stood. He asked if the house was titled solely in my name. I said yes. He asked if it predated the marriage. I said by 17 years. He said North Carolina is equitable distribution, but separate property acquired before marriage and kept solely titled throughout tends to stay separate, especially with no deed modification and no commingling of mortgage instruments. He said call me Monday and we'd go through it properly. The third call was to a woman named Carla, a realtor I'd crossed paths with at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon a few years back. She answered on the second ring. I told her I wanted to list the house. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "How fast are you thinking?" I said faster than people would be expecting. She said she'd come by that afternoon at 2. She showed up at 1:50. Francine came home the next evening still glowing, the warmth coming off her the way it does after a day that felt right. She talked for 20 minutes about how beautiful the ceremony was, how Elaine's grandmother got up and danced, how the whole thing went off perfectly. She was still talking when she noticed I hadn't said anything. "You're quiet," she said. "Long weekend," I said. She kissed my cheek and went to shower. I sat at the kitchen table with a folder in front of me. The deed, mortgage statements going back to 1993, a 9-page accounting of every financial contribution I had made to Kendrick's education, transportation, and living expenses over 14 years. I hadn't kept a running tab at the time. That's not what fathers do. But I'd kept receipts, because that's what contractors do. The listing went live on a Thursday morning. By Sunday, we had 2 showings scheduled. By the following weekend, we had an offer, a couple from Mooresville, a pediatric nurse, and an electrician, young family, pre-approved, earnest about closing quickly. She was due in August. They wanted to be settled. I said yes. Francine found out on a Tuesday afternoon, not from me. She'd come home to find a lockbox on the front door and a for sale sign in the yard that hadn't been there when she left that morning. She called me 9 times in 40 minutes. I answered the 10th. Her voice came through at a pitch I hadn't heard in 14 years of marriage. "What is this? What did you do? That's our house." "It's my house," I said. "It was always my house. You've been living in it." Silence. "Then I don't, this can't." "Yes, it can," I said. "You understood all of this at the vineyard the moment you sent that text." She started in shock, then something sharper. She said I was overreacting to a seating arrangement. She said Victor being emotional wasn't something she could have managed differently. She said she had been trying to keep the peace and that I, of all people, should understand that. She said a great deal. I let her finish. Then I said, during his toast, Victor told a room full of people that Kendrick was his son. He stood up and claimed that boy in front of everyone who mattered, and no one corrected him. No one said, "Actually, there's another man who was there every single day." I wasn't looking for a speech, Francine. I wasn't looking for credit. I was looking for one person in that room to say my name out loud. She didn't answer that. I told her I'd arrange for her to collect her belongings on a date that worked for her. I told her I wished her genuinely well. I meant it. I wasn't carrying anger into whatever came next. I just wasn't carrying her. Kendrick called 4 days after Francine. His voice was careful the way it gets when he's thinking through what he wants to say before he says it. A habit he picked up somewhere around 15, which I always took as a sign that somebody raised him right. He said he hadn't known about the seating arrangement, that his mother had managed the logistics, that he never intended for things to go the way they went. He stopped himself partway through that sentence. Then he said, "I should have walked over when I saw where you were sitting. I saw it. I just didn't move." "Yes," I said, "you should have." A long pause. "Victor gave a toast," Kendrick said slowly. "I let him because my mother asked and because I thought it would make the day easier. For her. What about making it right? I said. Not for me. What about making it right for yourself? He didn't answer right away. I said, I have been at every school event, every job interview prep, every time the car broke down and you needed someone on the phone at midnight talking you through it. I'm not keeping score. That's not what fathers do. But there is a difference between not keeping score and pretending the game was never played. Very quietly he said, I know who raised me. Then act like it, I said, not harshly, just plainly. He didn't say anything else. Neither did I. He hung up first. I didn't mind. The mediation was held in a conference room on Trade Street, 4th floor, February morning. I wore the burgundy tie. Francine arrived with her attorney. A capable man, younger than I expected, carrying a briefcase that was almost too new, and behind them, arms crossed, leaning against the back wall like a man who had bought tickets to somebody else's misfortune. Victor. He'd driven up from Colombia to sit in the back row of a legal proceeding, and I recognized the geometry of it, and I let it go, because feeling anything about it would have spent energy I'd already decided to keep. The mediator was a retired family law judge, white-haired, reading glasses, a kind of patience you only develop after decades of hearing every possible version of every possible story. He opened the file, read it without rushing, and said, Let's talk about the property on Weatherstone Drive. I placed the envelope on the table. Inside, the original purchase deed from 1993, 31 years of mortgage statements, the title insurance policy, and the 9-page accounting, tuition, car purchase, 4 years of car insurance in Kendrick's name, the Atlanta lease cosign, the phone plan, the emergency transfers, every gap Victor had left for 14 years, itemized. Francine's attorney spoke first and spoke well. He talked about the marital home in spirit if not in letter. He talked about reasonable expectations and the nature of a long partnership. When the mediator looked at me, I stood up. I said the house was purchased in my name in 1993, titled solely in my name from that day to this one, never refinanced jointly, never modified on the deed. I said I had no objection to equitable distribution of marital assets. And I listed them: the joint checking account balance, the furniture we'd bought together, the 2 vehicles purchased during the marriage. What was mine before the marriage was mine before the marriage. I slid the folder forward. The mediator picked it up. He read. Victor pushed off the back wall then and said, That man has no idea what Francine put into that household. I turned around. I looked at him. Just looked, the way you look at something you've already made up your mind about. I said, Did you ever pay child support? The easy grin went somewhere. I said, Because I have documentation of every year I covered what a court order should have required from you and didn't. Kendrick's school clothes for 3 years before I was his stepfather on paper. Every gap. I can leave you a copy if that would help. Victor's jaw moved, nothing came out. The mediator looked at him over the top of his glasses. Then he looked back down at the folder and said, There is no legal basis to challenge the sale of separately titled property purchased prior to this marriage in North Carolina. We're concluded. Outside, the February light was cold and white and very clear. I stood on the steps of that building and breathed air that tasted like it belonged to me. Kendrick was waiting on the sidewalk. He'd come alone. No Francine, no Victor, no Elaine. Just him in a jacket he'd bought with his own paycheck, hands in his pockets, looking at the pavement the same way he used to look at a long division problem when he was 9 years old and hadn't found the method yet. He said, I should have walked over. At the vineyard. When I saw where they put you, I should have walked over and brought you to the front. Yes, I said, you should have. I'm sorry. I looked at him. The big ears, the way he'd grown into standing straight, all that good weight on him now. You're still the man I helped raise, I said. That part doesn't disappear. He nodded. We didn't embrace. We shook hands, firm, two-handed, the kind that means something. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an honest one, and I could work with honest. These days I'm renting a place in Dilworth, a quiet neighborhood in South Charlotte where the trees are old and the streets go calm after 8 o'clock. There's a coffee shop on the corner that opens at 6. I take the same table by the window every morning. The magnolia outside does very little in winter, but in March it'll come back. Things tend to. I've been going back to the barber shop on Beatty's Ford Road on Saturday mornings. Place I used to go before the marriage when I had more free time. There's a man there named Rufus. 71 years old, retired railroad worker. Hands that are never quite still, eyes that don't miss much. He's been in that shop since 1987 and knows half of Charlotte's history by first name. One Saturday last month he was working along my hairline and looked at me in the mirror and said, "You got the look." "What look?" I asked. "Like a man who set something down and his hands are still getting used to being empty." I laughed. Hadn't laughed much in a while, and it felt like walking into a room you'd forgotten was in the house. "Empty hands find something new to hold," Rufus said. He kept the clippers moving. They always do. I've been thinking about that on the drive home ever since. Here is what 14 years and one October wedding finally made clear to me. A man can give everything, the bills, the miles, the signatures, the late-night phone calls, the years, and still find himself in row 8, not because he did anything wrong, but because he kept making himself easier to overlook, thinking that taking up less space was the same thing as being gracious, thinking that if he just stayed steady and quiet and useful, the people he loved would eventually see him clearly. They won't always. Some people will look right at what you've built and see only what it costs them to acknowledge it. And the morning will come. It will always come, when you are standing in your kitchen at 6:15 with a coffee cup going cold in your hand, and you realize that the seat you kept giving away was your own, that you moved yourself to the back row, that you sat at table 7, that you ate the salmon and complimented a stranger's earrings, and told yourself it was just one day, just one seating arrangement. It doesn't mean anything. It means something. You don't have to yell to take your place back. You don't have to make a scene or break anything or need the room to see you do it. You just have to stop moving yourself. Stand in your own spot. Let the paperwork say what it says. And then walk out into the February light and breathe air that belongs to you. That is enough. That has always been enough. If this story found you this morning, I hope it found you before you moved yourself one row further back. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Voices of Uncle Henry. I'll be right here next week with another story. You take care of yourself and each other.